What's going on, Ball and Glove loving Brewer fans? Welcome to the Brewers Trilogy podcast presented by the Wisconsin Sports Trilogy. I'm your host, Tyler. You can find me on Twitter at Tyler Kurth or read my articles at Reviewing the Brew on Twitter. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter at Trilogy_pod or find us on Facebook by searching the Wisconsin Sports Trilogy and also now on YouTube by searching the Wisconsin Sports Trilogy as well. Joining me, as always, is my cheesehead-loving buddy, Trevor. He is the host of the Trilogy podcast. He can be found on Twitter at Bender_Trevor. Trevor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Pretty good day at work today. It's kind of, again, we're just like getting this out early during the Brewers off season. So a little bit strange time again for us. It might be the new norm, who knows? But it opens up the weekend for us, or at least Sundays up for us a little bit. But overall, pretty good. Work's actually going semi-fast this week. Got some new projects I'm working on at work, so everything's going good. And then I got home and just got done recording the podcast, the Packers podcast with you, and got to rip on the Vikings for signing Kirk Cousins to a two-year, $66 million extension. So, it's been a pretty good day.
If only we could rip on the fucking Dodgers, but fortunately we can't because they're now World Series champions. So.
Oh, I still will.
All right, that'll be the only positive talk about the Dodgers this entire podcast. So we'll leave it at that. Anyway, last week we talked about potential free agents at the offensive position. So now this week we are going to switch over to the pitching side, in specifics to starting pitching. I didn't really want to focus on any relief pitchers because the Brewers have a pretty decent bullpen and there's just so many damn guys it's hard to keep track of. So at least there's a slightly smaller list with the starting pitchers. So is there anything you want to talk about before we get started in this?
Yeah, and this is, okay, I don't know if this is like for real, but people are talking about this like this is for real, and I'm not okay with it. What the fuck is up with Josh Hader is getting traded? What? You don't just get rid of good players. Oh, he's making a lot of money now. No, he's not. He's making still arbitration numbers. Like, it's not like he's making $15 million a year. Christian Yelich is making a lot of money, and he performed like shit this year. So if you're going to complain about money, that should be the place you go to. Why are we trading Josh Hader? The last 2 years, he won NL Reliever of the Year. This year, if it wasn't for Devin Williams, he probably would have been a finalist again. Like, he is an incredible player. Why are we just like, too much money, let's trade him? No, let's cut Ryan Braun. Let's cut, players that aren't very good. Eric Sogard. Like, there's plenty of guys on this team that aren't very good. And if we're going to cut players in the bullpen, like, let's get Corey Knebel out the door before we're fucking trading Josh Hader. Like, that does not make any sense to me whatsoever.
Well, you've now sparked our next week podcast conversation. So I have a really fun idea for how to do all the Josh Hader rumors. So we will dive into that next week. We'll let you channel it down there. I can see the steam coming out of your ears. So, all right, let's go back here to free agency. Starting pitchers. So the Brewers, I think, obviously have locks in Woodruff and Burns next year. And then you have question marks for guys who are going to be on the team in Hauser, Lindblom, Lauer, and then Peralta. That's another topic for a different. He only started one game this year.
We just signed him to a 5-year deal.
Oh, yeah. But I don't know if he's going to be a starter or not, is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's a topic for another time, if he's going to be a starter or a relief pitcher. Brett Anderson just became a free agent as of the Dodgers winning the World Series. So I said I wouldn't say it again, but I did. And then there are some internal options down on the farm. Dylan File, Alex Bettinger, Zach Brown, Ethan Small. And then I put Anton Kelly in there as well because he had a really good time at the alternative training site this season. So, with that being said, are there any free agents who catch your eye who are available? I'll let you pick the first one today.
Okay, before we get to that, you mentioned internal options. Is Drew Rasmussen strictly a bullpen arm at this point? Like, is that all he's going to be, or does he have potential to potentially move into that starting rotation?
So I'm really glad you mentioned Drew Rasmussen because throughout the minor leagues, he actually started quite a few games. 23 of his 27 appearances in 2019 were starts. So, yeah, I'd say he could be a starter. Whether or not they decide to do that, I do not know.
Fair enough. You never really know. Like, I think after the first year he was in the majors, I think we're still talking about Josh Hader potentially being in the starting rotation, but that just might not be the role that they have set out for Drew Rasmussen. It'll be interesting to see. I would bet probably a bullpen arm, but I'm not really 100% sure on that.
Yeah, I'd kind of agree with you there in that assessment. So we'll see what Council does there. As for true free agents, sorry I lied. You don't get to pick the first one. I'm going to choose Kevin Gausman to talk about. So I kind of broke our list here down into tiers. So like there are some cheaper options, some guys who are like kind of on the bubble in the Brewers price range, and then there are obviously guys that's like not a chance. So we'll start in tier one, the low money options. And Kevin Gausman's that first guy I want to talk about. He pitched for a long time with the O's, and as you can imagine, he kind of got lost there because the O's really suck. He ended up getting traded to the Braves in 2018. He was phenomenal in those 10 starts of that year, posted a 2.87 ERA. In 2019, for whatever reason, he lost it. He got the yips. He was terrible. Ends up being DFA'd by the Braves, claimed off waivers by the Reds. And then the Reds decided not to retain him after that season because he was just going to cost too much, and he didn't pitch well enough to earn it. So he signed a one-year deal with the Giants this year and pitched quite well. For a $9 million deal, I thought it was really generous, but he posted a 3.26 ERA in his 10 starts this year, only failed to pitch a minimum of 5 innings twice. So a solid inning eater, relies primarily on a fastball, throws that 49% of the time, changeup 42% of the time. Sits in the mid-90s with his fastball and then mid-80s with that changeup. And the cool part about his changeup is it actually possesses a lot of that horizontal break, nothing similar to Devin Williams, but his break's 13 inches horizontally, whereas Williams is 18. And then over the last 2 years, Kevin Gausman has posted K per 9 ratios over 11. So what do you think about him?
I mean, to me, he sounds like potentially of this, of the players I've looked at kind of in this tier that you have laid out for me, like to me, he probably sounds like the most interesting. Having a guy with that kind of movement on his changeup or whatever you call that pitch, I think that is definitely something that interests me in terms of a low-level guy. Like, he seems like still an upgrade over, Brett Anderson, who we're losing, or, even Josh Lindblom. Like, he still feels like a step up from those guys. And then, like, I was looking at Michael Wacha and Alex Wood, guys that, like, I've definitely wanted in previous years and guys I've been excited about. But you look at their stats, and I'll start with Michael Wacha. He's been a guy I've been clamoring for probably since 2016, something like that. I don't know exactly. But, you look from 2013 when he got into the league as a 21-year-old, which is crazy, to 2017. If you look at his numbers, his ERA was pretty good. 2016, it was 5.09, but his FIP was actually under 4 at 3.91. So maybe pitching into a little bit of bad luck that year. But you further look into that FIP, he did not have a single year over 4 for his FIP. So he was pitching extremely well. 2018 came along, 4.22, still not terrible, respectable, end of the rotation type of guy. But the thing that concerns me is these last 3 years goes from 4.22 in 2018, like I said, up to 5.61 and 5.25 this past year. And that's concerning to me. Like 2 years in a row of struggling kind of concerns me. And then it's almost identical for Alex Wood. You look back for Alex Wood, 2013, he was in the league as well. And then you look all the way up to 2018, there wasn't a full MLB season that he was above a 4 for his FIP. And then 2019, 6.38, or 2020, 5.01. So, like, just not good numbers from these guys in the last 2 years. And, you think maybe they can bounce back after a bad year. You kind of expect guys to bounce back, regress to the mean type of thing. But these guys have had it in back-to-back years. Maybe that means, they're going to have a really good year next year. But it just, makes me question if spending money on them, even if it is a little amount, is kind of worrisome, because then you have them in the starting rotation and they're not performing. How long does Counsell stay with them? All of those types of things that come along with signing a player like that.
Yeah, and I mean, the good thing is Michael Wacha last year signed a deal with the Mets for $3 million, just super cheap. And then you think, again, with Wacha and Wood here, the biggest thing is, can either of these guys stay healthy? I mean, Wood barely pitched this year, but yet was still on the postseason roster for the Dodgers. Wacha spent some time on the IL with shoulder inflammation this year. And I think, when you compare these two, they both have really good upsides when healthy. It's just a matter of, are you going to see them reach that level again? I don't really know. I mean, when I kind of look at these two, I mean, Wood has kind of that awkward arm delivery, and obviously he's a lefty, so that has some benefit to it. And Michael Wacha, I really like his stuff, even though he's not overall super overpowering. His fastball is not really straight. He mixes in his changeup a good amount, 30%, so he keeps hitters off balance. And then he also throws in a cutter there that breaks the opposite way, although his cutter has literally the least amount of break to it that I've ever seen on a cutter. It's terrible. Actually, when it's compared on StatCast here to pitchers with a similar velocity, it is negative 14% less break compared to other MLB pitchers. That's how little it breaks. Yeah, really, when we talk about these three guys, I'm going to go back up to Gausman here, because I think he's the most intriguing out of the first three guys we've mentioned here. And I feel like the market, if it's going to be slow this year, given teams, lost money this year and we don't really know what to expect, I don't think he's going to be getting around that $9 million like he got in 2020. So could it get down closer to $5 million? I think there's a very realistic chance of that for Kevin Gausman.
Yeah, and one other guy I was looking at kind of in this price tier, and a guy pretty familiar with as being a Brewers fan, is Anthony DeSclafani, and I always butcher it. I know how to say it, but I always mess it up. He is a guy that I kind of like if for that price range that we're talking about, I kind of like the gamble with him. He is a little bit older than Michael Wacha and Alex Wood, which seems weird because I feel like we've been talking about those two players forever. But DeSclafani is an interesting guy. You look at some of his numbers, a career 4.29 ERA, his FIP for his career 4.25. So, those numbers over a career should even out pretty well, and they do for him. He had a terrible 2020. He had a FIP of 6.1. ERA was 7.22. Just terrible. But, maybe that is the one player you take a chance on, because he only had one down year. And he's been pretty solid throughout his career. If you're spending minimal money on this guy, and you're expecting, a Josh Lindboom role, 4 or 5. If that's what you're getting out of him, you're not spending a lot of money, and he could probably perform to your number 3 if he gets back to kind of what he was doing earlier on in his career. That's something that is pretty interesting to me. You look back 2016, he had a 3.28 earned run average. 2019, he had a 3.89. That year, I think, was maybe a little bit of luck. The difference is half a percentage point from FIP to ERA. So, like, not a huge amount, but definitely half a point is a little bit significant there. But overall, I think he's a guy that, getting that bounce back, I think, is going to be something that he does. I don't know entirely why, because like I said, he's a little bit older than those other guys, but I just have a feeling he's going to be able to bounce back from a rough 2020.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, you mentioned the age, but I mean, that's typically when pitchers of that age, you're starting to really like work on your finesse a lot and you're controlling the ball a lot more. And the good part with DeSclafani is he's still hitting that high velocity. This year, his fastball and his sinker were still at 95 miles an hour. So that's cooking pretty good. His slider is in at 86-ish, somewhere in that range. So, I mean, he really kind of fits that mold because the Brewers like their pitchers to have two variations of fastballs. Normally it's that four-seamer or two-seamer, and then usually like a sinker or a cutter. It seems like it's the theme with this team. So DeSclafani fits that bill there, and he's not a very like high strikeout guy. So it's kind of like you're replacing what you expected out of Brett Anderson if you'd go out and sign DeSclafani this year. Just obviously he's a righty, whereas Brett Anderson was a lefty. But kind of similar, like pitch to contact. Obviously, Brett Anderson was a lot slower in terms of velocity, so I think DeSclafani has some upside there in that regard, and should be able to sign for less than $5 million, which is also very encouraging as well.
Yeah, and I briefly looked back at his, I took two random years. 2015 and 2019, he pitched both 31 games that year, started all 31 of those. And in 2015, he pitched 184 innings. 2019, he pitched 166. So if you break that down, that's averaging in 2019 5.35 innings per outing, and then 5.93 that other year in 2015. So, if you're getting, a solid inning and a third to close to 6 innings every time out, especially as a low money starter, a guy that's fourth or fifth probably in your rotation, that seems like a win to me. And that seems like something he would be able to do and bounce back to that level of player.
Yeah, I completely get what you're saying there. And it sounds like something Stearns would kind of jump all over. And it just, it would help. He's coming from a division foe. Maybe you can provide some insight there on the Reds. So little added bonus there as well. So the next guy I want to talk about is Taijuan Walker. So the guy he has like a really weird history. Originally drafted by the Mariners, traded to the Diamondbacks in 2016, elects free agency after 2019 to sign with the Mariners again, and then he gets traded by the Mariners again. So traded by the same team twice. This time he ends up going to Toronto, pitched fairly decent this year, which is kind of why he is intriguing to me. But he has 3 different really good pitches. He's got fastball, cutter, and a sinker, so lots of velo there in that regard. Low to mid 90s with the fastballs, cutters mid 80s, and then sinker gets up into the 90s again. And then he also mixes in a split change and a curve. So really good 5-pitch mix there. And when he's right, he can work deep into games. It's just the problem is he doesn't have a consistent track record of doing this throughout the years. So it could be someone who signs for around that $5 million mark.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting option. Sorry about the fire alarms. My neighbor doesn't know how to cook, and our fire alarms, because we live in the same house, are connected. So the one counter I have to this is he has kind of gotten a little lucky through his career. I like the FIP and ERA comparisons. I think it makes a lot of sense to actually see how a pitcher's pitching versus, lucking into some outs, different things like that. So to me, a FIP of 4.24 to an ERA of 3.84 over the career We just mentioned that, over a career, and he's been in the league since 2013. So, he has a significant amount of time in the league. So you'd think that maybe those numbers would be a little bit closer. At this point, they're, you know, point 0.4 off or whatever that math is. And that's something that concerns me a little bit going into Miller Park. Like, would that affect him a lot? Would that, like, his FIP has an average of 4.24. Would that mean in Miller Park his ERA turns to 4.84 rather than 3.84?
Yeah, it's always hard to tell. I mean, completely get what you're saying with the luck point there, and I think his inconsistencies kind of really speak to that as well. I mean, so it would be a little bit of a gamble there with signing him, but again, would be kind of that lower tier option for the Brewers. I do want to shift kind of into the on the bubble for the Brewers price range, and the first guy I want to talk about is Mike Minor. He's really a tough guy to figure out. He came up with the Braves in the early 2000s and had seasons ERAs of 4.14, 4.12, 3.21, and then 4.77, all with the Braves. So, not bad, nothing outstanding. He ends up signing as a free agent with the Royals in the 2017 season, where he was just dominant strictly as a bullpen pitcher. After that year, he's like, okay, I'm going to go be a starter again, goes to the Rangers, and his first year back has a 4.18 ERA. And then 2019, he was actually in Cy Young candidates. He was lights out at times, an all-star. He was 8th that year in the votes, like I mentioned, and ended up with a 3.59 ERA. And then, of course, this year in 2020, he was struggled because of the contract year. He was traded to the A's, where he again struggled some more. So he typically has been around that $9 million a year range. Like I said, he's a tough guy to figure out. Where he's going to fall, I have no idea, but I do think he is a very intriguing option.
Yeah, I think a lot of these guys that you have listed here in this tier are like, they're intriguing, and I feel like they're a little bit higher ceiling. But for the extra money, is it worth it when they're still not ultra consistent? Like, it's still like you're paying an extra 5 million or whatever it happens to be to these guys. It's still not like, oh, you feel like extremely confident with them as your third starter or anything like that, because like you have Mike Minor here, and like you mentioned, it's just like all over the place for him. You look at Tyler Chatwood, kind of the same thing. You look at Robbie Ray, a guy that, his career FIP is 4.12, career ERA 4.26. That doesn't sound like any better than what we were talking about in that low level tier. So, and it just seems like that's kind of the case. I think Tyler Chatwood's the same kind of example. It's just, there's a lot of like this, and it happens in MLB, especially for pitchers, but hitters as well. You have big up and downs because you miss your spot, and if you miss your spot for a month at a time by inches, that can turn a sub-3 ERA to 5 or greater ERA very easily. So, like, I get why there's so much inconsistencies, but to me, with the Brewers as an organization, they don't have the money the Yankees, the Dodgers have. So if you're going to have those inconsistencies, why not take a little bit less, pay a guy like, Kevin Gausman, or even Michael Wacha, Alex Wood, who I'm not thrilled about. But to me, that makes more sense to spend less money to have a guy that's inconsistent. So like this range, unless there's a guy that really stands out to me, that I like really feel confident in their stuff, they're starting to come around a little bit. You've seen some changes, those types of things. I don't really love the options here. It's either, bargain hunts to me, or you spend all the money, because if you spend the money in the middle ground, to me, it seems like what the Vikings are doing with Kirk Cousins, right? They're spending that money, and they're just going to stay in mediocrity forever as long as Kirk Cousins is on their team.
Only you would find a way to bring Kirk Cousins into this podcast. Oh my gosh.
Twice already this podcast.
But I do completely get what you're saying. It makes sense. I mean, when you look at like Robbie Ray you were talking about, I mean, he's got that mid-90s fastball. He possesses a lot of swing and miss stuff, but he also just runs into trouble at the time. And you look at another guy, I don't think Porcello is on this list. Heavy sinker baller, generates a lot of contact, doesn't walk out, can get hit around from time to time. And all these guys are going to be near double digits for their average annual value for contracts. So I completely get what you're saying. If you really want to bolster the starting rotation, you just have to go all out. And I mean, you might be able to do that. The Brewers have done it with hitters before. Yasmani Grandal, that was a 1-year, $18 million deal. Could they look to do the same thing with starting pitchers, especially because starting pitching is actually a strength of this ball club? Maybe. I don't know. There is definitely an argument there for it. So as long as we're talking about it, that is a really good transition into some of the really high-tier guys who are going to cost a lot of money. I wrote 4 of them down on here. I got Trevor Bauer, Jake Odorizzi, Marcus Stroman, and then Mariyasu Tanaka. So which one of these guys, if you could pick one, who are you signing?
Oh, Trevor Bauer. Give me some Trevor Bauer. I love that guy. I don't know how a locker room would take him because I feel like he's very outspoken, but I like that as like watching professional athletes my whole life. Like he just tells it how it is or how he thinks it is. And I like that. And then you look at the pitcher, right? He's a career 3.90 ERA. This past year, he was very, very good. He's on this Reds team, and he pitches 173 for an ERA this year, but was 5-4. An offense that's going to figure it out in 2020 in the Brewers, you get that type of production from Trevor Bauer, throw in Brandon Woodruff, throw in Corbin Burns, throw in Adrian Hauser, who I think is going to have a bounce back year. It almost doesn't matter what happens with the rest of the rotation because 1, it's one guy. And 2, those top 3 can carry you. And if Adrian Hauser has a bounce back year and is closer to what we saw, 2018, 2019 rather than 2020, he's going to be that would be an incredible starting the top 4 in your rotation, and that's going to carry you to a lot of victory. Trevor Bauer is just a guy I love to watch pitch. I think he is incredible. And he's another guy, he's been in the league quite a while. His FIP and ERA are pretty close to each other. Again, that career ERA of just under 4. But he's had years where he's been really good. 2018, he was an All-Star, 6th in Cy Young. He actually got some MVP votes. He was 22nd in that. He had an ERA of 2.21 that year. Got the ERA title this year at 1.73. WHIP this year was 0.795. He's a very talented guy and one that I just like the human as well. So that's a guy I like, but really any guy on this list, I think, you mentioned north of 20 mil for Tanaka, so that one feels really like a pipe dream. All of these guys kind of feel like a pipe dream, but really any of these guys I think I would be more than happy with, but Trevor Bauer always stands out to me.
Yeah, and Trevor Bauer, as outspoken as he is, he's went on the Twitter machine and said, I only want a 1-year deal. It just maximizes my value. So, I mean, that could play to the Brewers' favor this year. I mean, could they sign him for anywhere in that $15, $18 mil range? Maybe. I don't know if he goes to a bigger market. He's probably going to get north of 20, but they're going to want multiple years. So I guess that'll all depend on what route he decides to go because, he was incredible this year. And
that makes sense, and that maximizes your value as long as you're good. You have to be good. And, he's been in the league since 2012. This would be his age 30 season, so he's getting up to a point where it might make sense for him to, maybe one more, two more at max, but then take like a $3 or $4 million deal to really maximize his value. So maybe he's got another 1 year deal in him. Milwaukee would be perfect.
That is completely fair. Trevor Bauer, I don't know. I'm kind of split. Like, I really like him. He had a great year. He struggled a little bit in 19, but obviously this year we knew he was incredible. So, like, the one guy, if I could have picked out of the top of our list, I guess today, I'm just going to go with Marcus Stroman. I mean, obviously he has to stay healthy for it to pay off. But heavy sinker, really fast cutter. I mean, he just possesses elite level stuff at elite level velocities, and it's just professional. Knows how to get outs, eat up innings again when he's right. I mean, the strikeout numbers not too terribly high. This defense is gonna have to work with him and help him out, which I guess could be a little bit concerned with Keston there, obviously at second. But I really like Stroman. Whether or not we can fish him out of New York or not, I really have no idea. He's probably going to get a good payday. I have written on here north of 12 million. So how far north? I don't really know.
Yeah, and just another guy, Jake Odorizzi, to me, like when I just thought of him and didn't look at his stats yet, I was like, okay, yeah, I would love that. And definitely bringing him back to Milwaukee, who originally drafted him back in 2008. That would be fun. But like, if you're going to spend all that money, like the numbers don't really stand out to me. Like there's a lot more of that inconsistency issues. A few, like 3 years that his FIP was over 5. Last year it was over 6. So that's like a little bit concerning to me. Like if you're going to spend all that money, you have to have at least somewhat consistency. I think Trevor Bauer next to Jake Odorizzi is probably the least consistent of them if you take away injuries. So that's again, little bit concerning. But if you get a guy on a 1 year deal and he's trying to, take prove-it deals, you put your money on Trevor Bauer because I do think he is a pretty talented guy. But to me, Jake Odorizzi is just a little bit too inconsistent to be able to be like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna spend, last year he's making 17 million. That seems, maybe he's not gonna make that this year, but that seems like way too much money to be paying him there. If he was more in that, $8 to $12 million range, I would say definitely think about it. Like that's kind of close to our budget. But at north of 12, anywhere north of 12, I don't think I would be a fan.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Odorizzi was part of that really crazy Christian Yelich trade tree, if you remember that, when we went through that I think that was with Dr. Scott when we discussed it. So really cool history and connection there with Jake Odorizzi anyway. All right. Have we touched on all of the pitchers you wanted to discuss for free agency today?
I think so. I did want to mention one internal option that I've been excited about. I've mentioned his name on this podcast before, of Dylan File, and I can never remember who got us excited about that. I can't remember if it was Jack Stern, David Gasper, or Matt Carroll. One of the three got us really excited about Dylan File, and that is a guy that if we can see him in 2021, I would love to see him. I am really excited about him. These other guys on this list I'm excited about as well, but that's one guy that I've been thoroughly excited to see in Milwaukee since that podcast that we talked about him. Again, I can't remember who brought him up to us.
I want to say it was Matt, but again, I can't remember for sure. But yeah, Dylan File, interesting part about him is he's not protected by the Rule 5 draft this year, so he needs to get added to the 40-man. Otherwise, I feel like some other team is definitely going to scoop him up come this, I think that's December when that deadline is. So
before we leave, one quick question. Like, how much does not having a minor league season affect that Rule 5? Like, are teams going to be willing to take chances? And I'm not thoroughly up on it, but it sounds like you have to have, if you take these guys, you have to have them on your active 26 the entire year, correct? Or at least the active, or at least the 40 man, they have to have them on the entire year. They can't like cut them or anything.
Yeah, that's what it is.
So like after a year where you didn't get to see them pitch at all, like you don't have any tape on them, like I just wonder how that Rule 5 is going to go. Like, do you really have to protect these players? Unless they're like, standout prospects. But, Dylan File, I don't feel like is rated highly in the MLB top 100 prospects or anything like that. So do you protect him? Yeah, maybe. But also at the same time, maybe not. Maybe because of that not having a minor league system, it helps the Brewers in that way. That they don't have to protect as many players because teams aren't going to be willing to just go willy-nilly and try to get these guys that they haven't seen now for over a year and seeing them actually pitch or hit or whatever the case may be, depending on their position.
Yep, that's why teams are being really hush-hush about what happened at their alternative training sites this year, because that obviously would kind of change their views on certain players. So yeah, it doesn't affect the rule and the fact that they still need to be on the 40-man, like you said, and once they're picked up by a team. But yeah, the decision-making process will be interesting to monitor as we progress here closer to December when that deadline is approaching. So with that being said, we are going to sign out here for today. We are going to talk about Josh Hader next week. Get ready for it. It's going to be fun.
Excited.
It's going to be a good debate. Trevor's going to be steaming all week thinking about it, I believe. So until we're talking about Josh Hader next week, see you later, Brewer fans.
Justin Stearns.